Today, the Walt Disney Company is announcing that we are investing an incremental €2 billion to expand Disneyland Resorts Paris. This is the largest investment that we're making in Disneyland Resorts Paris since it opened in 1992. And we're going to use this investment to build out 3 large lands at Disneyland, one for Frozen, one for Star Wars, and one for Marvel. Disneyland Paris opened in 1992 and expanded with another park about 10 years later. This investment, which represents the largest investment we've made since we opened in 1992, is the direct result of growing confidence that we have in the economy of Europe and in France in particular.
With the Disneyland Paris resort now completely and fully owned by the Walt Disney Company, it was time to start major works to bring the parks and hotels back to life, as much of it was outdated, old, and sometimes even falling apart. To achieve this, a major renovation campaign began under the name Project Sparkle. This would see many iconic attractions completely refurbished alongside many buildings and set pieces. However, most of these works happened in the Disneyland park. Walt Disney Studios was newer and therefore didn't need that much attention. Plus, the real work was happening backstage, creating an expansion with a scale never before seen in the resort. With Bob Iger's announcement of new lands themed to Marvel, Star Wars, and Frozen, fans were more excited than ever before for the future of the Parisian parks, and rightfully so. However, it soon became clear that the major €2 billion investment wasn't just for expanding the park, but an investment package for many major projects in the resort, including the studio's expansion, but also hotels and attraction renovations, the Disney Village makeover, and some smaller ones. But a large part of that money was indeed to be invested in this park. As with any project we've been through in the history of this park, you won't be surprised to know that Avengers Campus wasn't the first iteration of the Marvel land to occupy the backlot. Instead, a New York-themed area was proposed to take over that left side of the park. Parts of the concept art and models leaked some years ago, although not in great quality, but in which we can clearly see a beautifully themed New York street, once again a callback to never-built plans of Disney MGM Studios Europe. However, this one would be fully inside the Marvel universe. Guests would enter the land by passing under a large recreation of the overhead metro system from the city that never sleeps. This would also act as a sightline barrier between lands and allow for a much stronger reveal of the land. The moment you enter, tall buildings, lights, posters, signs, and more greet you instantly. In the back, Rock and Roller Coaster is now completely hidden by very large skyscrapers. This was a reskin of already existing buildings, restaurants, and attractions. And while Avengers Campus completely demolished Armageddon, it's likely that the walkthrough would be adapted with a completely new theme and storyline focusing on Iron Man and Stark Industries. The entrance to this attraction would be done via a huge recreation of the arc reactor from the films, powering the entire block of buildings. On the left, large buildings would hide the 2 restaurants and restrooms of the land. This is where today Pim Kitchen and Stark Factory can be found, the buffet and self-service. However, the concept art makes it appear as a mix of different restaurants, perhaps with a window or 2 serving New York-style pizza slices. On the roof, we can see a large sign advertising Murdoch and Nelson, the attorneys from Daredevil. At the end of the street, the largest building comes into view. This is hiding the e-ticket ride of this side of the park, a completely re-themed rock and roller coaster, now themed to Spider-Man. This is where things get even more exciting, as several models of the inside of the Gravity building were created during this blue sky phase. The idea here is to simulate at great speeds swinging with Spider-Man around New York at night. So expect huge skyscraper set pieces, cranes, and of course a few villains. The launch happens at street level, with several cars and many signs and streetlights all zooming past you. At great speeds, the first and largest loop comes and there's this huge building that literally wraps around the tracks. That combined with the G-forces make you feel as if you're truly doing some crazy stunts. The battle is between Spidey and the Green Goblin, and several figures or even animatronics would come into view every once in a while. At the end, you're back in the street and leave back into the land, where the same theme of New York City continues. To its side is the entrance to something else. Unfortunately, it's not known if this would be another attraction or make use of the stunt show theater for a new Avengers or Marvel-themed show. Well, while that didn't happen, Avengers Campus was a direct evolution of it. The land instead became the European meeting point for Marvel heroes and recruits, and became a part of a storyline present in 3 continents: Europe, America, and Asia. Avengers Campus actually has a defined storyline behind it, having started with Tony Stark's father, Howard. This was a European Stark Industries factory that was later converted into a SHIELD outpost and now brought back to life by Tony and the Avengers Initiative to recruit more heroes and have an HQ in the continent. Here are countless traces of these different uses, from the brick web adventure building and Stark Factory restaurant that used to be where much of the old factory was, to Peggy Carter's office inside the same restaurant. Of course, the old became the new, and many different characters transformed the space into what it is today. From Peen Industries assisting with food to the Avengers HQ, the icon of the land which hides the e-ticket ride. Avengers Assemble Flight Force was the largest victim of budget cuts in the land. It was meant to have a much more impressive queue and more closely connected to Iron Man rather than the Avengers as a whole. You'd enter a massive workshop completely powered by a large arc reactor. In there, the Iron Man animatronic would give you all the information regarding the story and what you would need to do. Unfortunately, it is not known how much different the ride itself would have been. Web Adventure was a ride designed for both Walt Disney Studios and California Adventure, and while they share many similarities, they are not identical. For Paris, the old Armageddon show building was demolished to make way for a much larger one. This old factory-themed building still pays homage to the old walkthrough by reusing some of the set pieces. To top it all off was the Quinjet. This recreation of the vehicle used by many different Avengers is always ready to take off, and you can see the engines running. It became a center icon guests see the moment they enter the land from both sides. What brings the whole land together, however, are the characters. During the day, several activations take place with different styles and heroes. There are stunts on top of buildings, displays of skill, and meets inside a training center. Unfortunately, the Stuntronic never made it to Paris. Instead, that budget was allocated somewhere else. But Spider-Man may yet fly above the Parisian outpost, as much of the infrastructure is already in place. The construction of Avengers Campus marked the first step of the expansion program. According to the original timelines, the idea was to open in phases, with 2 years in between editions. Avengers would therefore take over the backlot and open in 2021, the Major Lake and World of Frozen in 2023, and the Star Wars area in 2025. Armageddon closed its doors in April 2019, marking the actual start of the works to transform the park. The rest of the backlot followed suit with the closure of Rock and Roller Coaster in September of the same year, and things were progressing at good speeds. Land clearing on the expansion side of the project began that year, as the area would soon become the largest construction site the resort had seen in many years. However, just as things were starting to gain speed, mid-construction, a major force put everything in risk of even happening. The COVID-19 pandemic struck hard and fast, and tourism was by far one of the most affected industries. Disneyland Paris, currently in the middle of the largest investment project it had seen in nearly 30 years, would see everything put on hold. Once construction could resume, all the efforts were diverted to Avengers Campus, with the uncertainty that the world was seeing. At least the Marvel Land would be finished. The expansion could wait. At this time, a lot of money was spent to restart construction. It's here that we suspect many budget cuts had to be done, the largest victim being Flight Force. Even so, progress was made, and as the world began to reopen and get back to its feet, Disneyland Paris had the perfect opportunity to relaunch itself with the 30th anniversary. 2021 had come and gone, and the land was still not ready. Summer 2022 could be when the Avengers officially landed in Paris. The reopening of the resort and the start of the 30th anniversary were a huge time for Disneyland Paris. And with Avengers Campus opening in July, this anniversary became one of the most memorable times in the resort's history. What was achieved by the entertainment teams, the drone show, and the opening of the land was everything it needed to truly get back up. With the tide turning and construction wrapping up, work on the expansion began once more, but the nearly 2 years of inactivity would send shockwaves still felt today. It was impossible to open the largest expansion the Paris parks had seen on time. In fact, it would still take 3 full years of construction and then several more months on top to open. But with a clear goal in mind, the teams restarted the groundworks and began excavating the large lake in the future center of Walt Disney Studios Park. The Disney Adventure World project was led by Imagineer Tom Fitzgerald. He believed that the park needed a main street that led guests to a hub like Central Plaza, but this time it had to be different, so that both parks were somewhat unique. That's where the tree-lined, park-like promenade to the lake came to be. Adventure Way is different to what most Disney parks offer, as it built itself around the concept of a stroll around the park. The atmosphere and landscaping take central role here rather than large themed buildings, but you still need them for rides, restaurants, and shops, and so the architecture style had to blend in perfectly with the nature and landscaping. Along the land, there are gardens themed to different characters, films, or locations, such as the Toy Story Garden that serves a new entrance to Worlds of Pixar. Gazebo Garden filled with small bronze statues of British characters like Winnie the Pooh or Peter Pan, and the Tangled Gardens, where a new ride can be found. Réponse Tangled Spin, based on the beloved 2010 film, gives guests the opportunity to hop aboard a boat and spin under many lanterns, recreating the famous I See the Light sequence from the film. The ceiling here is covered with paintings in the same style as Rapunzel would design to decorate her home, and the whole thing blends in perfectly with the rest of Adventure Way, as each garden is its own small world. There were different designs and proposals to populate the rest of the land when it came to the buildings and structures all around the lake and promenade, but nearly all of them share the same popcorn lights. These small, old-fashioned lamps have been used in the Disney parks for several decades and immediately bring a sense of warmth to any place. In this case, over 10,000 of them can be seen around Adventure Way, lighting each path every single night. For the first time in decades, a completely original background music score was created for Adventure Way. It needed to represent that same stroll around the park idea, and Imagineering went to Philippe Rombi, a French composer that began his career as a pianist at the Disneyland Hotel, to write it. The score perfectly brings everything together, with different motifs in different locations, becoming a gorgeous soundtrack for the entire park. The star attraction of this land, however, is the food. From small kiosks to counter service all the way to a full-blown sit-down restaurant, there is something for everyone. Drawing inspiration from another Disney park known for its food around the lake, Epcot. The regal view sits at the shore of the lake, giving guests dining inside breathtaking views of the world of Frozen. This fine dining location pays homage to all the Disney princesses, being adorned with gorgeous decor. In the center of Adventure Way lies the lake, Adventure Bay. This is the stage for the nighttime spectaculars, but also the centerpiece of the park. Around its shores lie several paths and gardens to relax or make your way to the next attraction. The biggest part of the expansion, however, is World of Frozen. Guests can make their way there via the rotating bridge, a beautifully designed piece of the puzzle of paths. The concept for World of Frozen began in Epcot as Maelstrom closed its doors to make way for a ride based on the instant hit film Frozen. This was Michel Dendolk's first major project at Walt Disney Imagineering. He now that oversees all of Disneyland Paris Imagineering. The idea was to bring the world of the film from inside the ride to its surroundings by building a complete land themed to Arendelle. Hong Kong Disneyland's World of Frozen was being designed alongside the Parisian version, and they share many similarities, even with different settings. Each has its own strong points and gave two completely different audiences the same feeling of going into the universes, where snowmen can walk and talk. In fact, that was a big part of Walt Disney Studios' version, the entertainment. Here you can see Olaf brought to life in front of your very own eyes via one of the most technologically advanced audio animatronics ever made. The ride itself also has dozens of these figures that perfectly bring the beloved characters to life in a boat adventure. Being a land, there are other activities to be done here, like tasting Nordic dishes, watching the people of Arendelle celebrate in the marina, visit the castle and meet royalty, and shop the perfectly crafted items. Adventure Way and the World of Frozen marked the second major shift in the story of the park. It was a moment in the resort never before seen, and it called for a change. During the opening of the expansion, the Walt Disney Studios Park was officially renamed to Disney Adventure World, a name that doesn't resonate with fans, but perfectly shows that the park isn't what it once was. It's something more. The expansion and Avengers Campus weren't the only changes that happened. In fact, before World of Frozen opened, two major shifts took place. Toon Studios, the Paris area, and Toy Story Playland became one land, Worlds of Pixar. This combined all the small mini-lands into a single place where guests can find themselves inside several Pixar films. One of these places being Cars Road Trip. To make way for Adventure Way, the Studio Tram Tour closed its doors. This saw the demolition of the London set, the entire left side of the tour, and the loading station. However, the most iconic part of the ride would remain. Catastrophe Canyon was renamed to Cars-tastrophe Canyon as the ride was shortened and rethemed to be placed in the world of the Pixar film Cars. Having opened in 2021, it was the first new ride to open here since Ratatouille in 2014, and people absolutely love to hate on it because it's a cheap makeover that has no place in a Disney park. Worlds of Pixar wasn't the only change because the front side of the park also saw many changes, these having started as early as 2016 with the closure of Animagique, soon followed by the incredible Cinemagique. These theaters would host two new shows, Mickey the Magician and Together, a Pixar musical adventure, with both opening with rave reviews of their own. With Toon Studios now removed from the park maps, and the entire identity of Walt Disney Studios moving away from the peek behind the curtain of movie productions, the decision to remake Studio One and Production Courtyard was made. Front Lot would remain practically the same, being the studios where movies are made, but a new transition from the real world to entering the different movie worlds was needed, and so Imagineering decided to create World Premiere. As guests step into the large soundstage, no longer are they in a movie set. They are in Hollywood at night, celebrating their big movie premiere. On the right, the Hollywood Gardens restaurant serves the stars, but now under a starry night sky illuminated by countless string lights. On the left, many buildings line the street, and inside is the Mickey's of Hollywood boutique, a large department store you could find in the 1920s. At the end of the street lies a glamorous Disney theater that leads guests into the screen. This very large set piece and the entirety of World Premiere are a direct evolution of the first proposals for Disney MGM Studios Europe. The theater has the magnet drawing guests in, the different buildings lining the sides, and even the Hollywood Hills wrapping everything with the help of projections, bringing them to life, comes straight from the early plans we explored. This just proves that no good idea is ever forgotten in Imagineering. They just evolve and return in different ways. This would be the perfect ending to our story. However, Bob Iger promised a second land around the lake themed to Star Wars. So, what happened there? Well, according to the first early plans, Star Wars was going to be a much smaller version of Galaxy's Edge, featuring the e-ticket Rise of the Resistance, a restaurant, and a few shops. While it was certainly going to be an amazing addition to the park, by the early 2020s, the land shifted from a galaxy far away to somewhere deep in Africa, with The Lion King. It wasn't until 2024 at the D23 Expo that Josh D'Amaro announced the Lion King themed area, one that would feature a massive water-based attraction to rival Pirates of the Caribbean and is sure to put Disney Adventure World on the Disney Park World map. Construction of this expansion slowly began in 2025 and is now in full steam ahead, so like some of the best stories out there, there is still much to be written. Disney Adventure World began as Disney MGM Studios Europe, a theme park planned to expand the Euro Disney Resort only 2 years after its opening. However, when the resort wasn't as successful as Disney's wildest dreams, it was shelved. Not for long though, as a few pages were taken to create a lackluster and, at that point in time, unnecessary Walt Disney Studios park, a theme park that brought more problems than it resolved for Disneyland Paris. Slowly but surely it got better, but it wasn't until 24 years later that the park deserved to have the Disney name. Well, it's still very much a flawed park that could use a lot of help, but it's also come such a long way and will continue to do so as long as there's imagination and the budget to allow it.